Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another edition of Bottom of the Bill. Today we have Kevin Scott on the podcast. Kevin Scott is an amazing bass player. He came up under the Col Bruce camp of people. I got to see him here in Jacksonville a few years ago at 1904 with a band called Forq, and it was really amazing. And ever since then, I've always wanted to get a chance to talk to him. And today we got to do that. It was an awesome episode. We talk about his time with the Col Bruce and just his perspective on music in general. It was a really insightful conversation. I definitely learned a lot and took away some very important things, I think, from this. I hope the same goes for you guys. Before we go on with the episode, we just want to mention the merch store that's in the description below. We got Bottom of the Bill merchandise you can buy, t-shirts, hats, all kinds of good stuff. Check it out. Anything you can do to help support would be amazing. And then a bigger thing to support, I would argue, is to subscribe here on YouTube or follow us on any of the platforms you listen on. And if you're enjoying it and you're getting something out of this, please share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it might be. We're on all the platforms. If you're getting something out of this and you think other people can get something out of it too, it'd be amazing. It also gets more eyes on our community here in Jacksonville, in Florida, and across the board as we get people on from everywhere. So just help give more musicians here a voice, you know? So yeah, anyways, here's Kevin Scott. Enjoy the episode.
This is Bottom of the Bill.
Kevin, thanks for being with us today, man. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. I saw you. We briefly met, and I doubt that you remember. I'm sure you don't remember it, but we met at 1904 Music Hall here in Jacksonville, probably 4 or 5 years ago when you were playing with Forq, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, you were super cool and everything. And the band was amazing. And I went down a rabbit hole with you guys and just really enjoyed the show. And so it's just cool to get to sit here now all these years later and talk to you, you know?
Wow, man, it's cool, man. It's you got a cool thing going on.
I appreciate that, man. So what's been going on? How's everything going with you?
Man, it's good. Been working a lot, moved back to New York.
Oh, you're in New York now?
Yeah, I moved up here first time, I think 2019.
Okay.
And then my wife and I moved to New Orleans right before the pandemic. So New Orleans was our pandemic 3-year hang. And then we moved back to New York last year.
Okay. What's that been like being back up there?
Oh, it's been amazing. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else for sure.
Yeah, man. I was up there back in February, just kind of scoping the scene out and stuff. There's so much just happening all at once on any given day. And the city is so dense, but also big at the same time. So it's like, and the energy is just amazing. I can imagine navigating that scene must be quite a task, but also rewarding at the same time if you're finding your niche, you know?
Well, I kind of had the reason why I moved up here originally was, oh, that's my dog barking. Hold on, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
Yeah, I moved up here from Atlanta because I was already traveling up here working all the time. I was playing with Wayne Krantz about once or twice a week. And then through that, I met people like Henry Hayde. I started working with Forq. And then, the whole scene, Donny McCaslin, all these great New York musicians. I was technically still living in Atlanta. And then I met my wife, and she was based out of here, and she's a fabricator and artist. So it just was the writing was on the wall to finally leave Atlanta.
Yeah.
And move up. And that was what happened.
Have you felt a shift in your career at all? Like have the opportunities kind of opened up more, or just kind of making it easier to pursue what you were already pursuing?
Yeah. I mean, because, Atlanta, it was like I ran that improv session once a week for like 15 years, and it's an amazing group of people and community I love dearly to this day. And but eventually it was like I felt like there was a ceiling there, and pre-pandemic I was on the road nonstop. So one of the big reasons sticking around Atlanta was because the financial reasons, because I was probably paying $600 a month to live in Atlanta compared to the outrageous money we're spending to live now in Brooklyn.
Right.
But the thing about New York is that in terms of the creative scene, I still think it's where it's at. And it's like last night I played a gig in Marlboro, which is about 2 hours from here, with John Medeski and Billy Martin and Will Bernard, and we just did improvised set for 90 minutes.
Hell yeah.
So there's just a lot more of those opportunities up here than in Atlanta, where I always felt Atlanta, which is one of the reasons why we all did it, was like an upstream battle against the city itself, because a lot of guys came through my session, and they're all a lot of people came through there doing really good things, but we didn't have the support from just like people that work 9 to 5s. Like, it was amazing musicians would come out, but there's just a ceiling there.
Right.
And here, we played last night, and it was 400 people on a Thursday to hear us play as weird as we possibly can and be in the moment. And, that's the only place like it, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I feel like there's a few places where obviously the music industry really thrives, and New York, LA, Nashville, and that's like where the real industry lives. And then you have like these cool scenes like Denver and Austin and stuff that are just like really good like music communities. But I feel like Atlanta has some of that too, but I think it's just in a different realm where like hip hop thrives there, and there's definitely like a pop, I think, element that exists there. But as far as like the improv and the jam world, I feel like it's probably a bit of an uphill battle, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I did, there's a time in my life where I was doing a lot of, I was working for with Akon and as far as Wale, I was doing a lot of hip hop and R&B stuff. Monica, Fergie, a lot of that stuff was going down the pipe for session work in Atlanta.
Wow.
But that changed, and like you said, it's not that's one of the coolest things about the scene, is that everybody's there for the intention of playing, and compared to let's like in Nashville, which there's amazing musicians in Nashville, but the scene there I'm not really into the idea of living there based on the fact it's such an industry town.
Right.
It's it just doesn't seem as much of a creative art scene as New York. And LA's gotten a lot better in terms of that. I mean, it's a lot of guys from New York moved to LA, and they're starting to have a lot of cool, more art shows there. And this place called Gold Diggers I've been hearing about is supposed to be where everybody's doing all those kind of shows.
Gold Diggers, huh? Well, that's good to know, as I'm going to be in LA next month, just scoping the scene out there as well. So it's good to know that that's going down. I'll check it out.
Yeah. It's so every city has its minuses and pluses to live there. It's just, there is no perfect place for anybody.
Right.
All right, guys, this episode's brought to you by Best Buds CBD Store. If you're like me, maybe THC isn't always the right high for you, or maybe the legal status of THC has you a bit hesitant to indulge. So at Best Buds CBD Store, they have an array of CBD and Delta-8 THC products. These guys truly care about their service, so everything is meticulously sourced and prepared to deliver a top-notch product and experience. If you head to their website, you'll find all kinds of educational information regarding Delta THC and CBD. Not to mention, if you use promo code BotBPod, that's BOTB pod, you'll save 10% on your order. This is not a one-time deal. If you use promo code BotBPod, every time you place an order with Best Buds, it will give you 10% off. That's in perpetuity, forever. So head over to bestbudscbdstore.com and start saving on all of your CBD and Delta-8 products. Enjoy, guys.
So I'm curious. You said that you did some work with Akon and Fergie and I'm sure a bunch of other people within that realm. How do you get connected into that world? Coming from, well, I guess first off, did you come from like the improv and jazz and jam world, or did you come from more of a of the R&B and or even like rock stuff coming up?
Well, I started playing. I'm third generation musician of my family, but I started playing music because I heard Green Onions in that movie The Sandlot when I was 10.
Yeah.
The first CD I was really ever exposed to my own was like this soul compilation. So really my roots are that, and then rock, and then extreme metal were my first roots, and then jazz. The term, I really hate that word. It's I don't think it's a very positive word, the word jazz. And I realized that studying jazz, that I really enjoy the idea of what improv was more than the vocabulary or language of that.
Right. Right.
Once I discovered, I think the first, besides all the Coltrane and Weather Report, all that kind of stuff I got exposed to in high school, I think it was when I heard Sean Lane and Jeff Sipe and Jonas Hellborg do that Temporal Analogs of Paradise record that was like, okay, they just improvised this whole thing and it doesn't sound like that language. And about that same time, is when, Bruce forced himself on me in a weird way, living. And I heard late Bronze Age, and I heard ARU, and I was like, okay, there is other ways to improvise than what, quote unquote jazz is.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. Being exposed to a lot of the jam band stuff, especially like some of the earlier stuff where there was this improv element, that until I found out about that, I was really under the impression that improv lived in jazz. And then as you discover, the Dead and, and then like the other bands kind of within that realm. And then, I discovered bands like Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and I started discovering Schofield and all this stuff. And I was like, well, this is a real, if you like some of that kind of, some of that harmony that's a little bit, very tension based, if you like some of that, but also want something that's relatively obtainable. This is a world that really kind of bridges the improv and the jam stuff together. I feel like the jazz and the jam stuff together. And it like just opened my mind up to this whole new idea of jamming over kind of jazzy funk stuff,
Sure. I mean, it's like I went the opposite in terms of a lot of people get into, because essentially like the Dead and, Allman Brothers and these bands, their main source of influence besides the American Songbook was Coltrane and Albert Ayler and all that amazing kind of freer music, all the Miles Davis stuff that was kind of evolving in the 60s.
Right.
And so it's, that's the interesting part about all of it is I started listening to more of the far out stuff before I listened to like Blue Train or something. I was already listening to Interstellar Space and the really hardcore free stuff. Then I got big into Zorn back then, and that whole insane world of what he does, of just a million albums of always different genres, based stuff. But yeah.
And so where was kind of, what was kind of the trajectory of your career from when you started playing, when you were playing like more your earlier influence stuff, and then you started getting involved with kind of, where you're at now? What would that look like?
Well, I mean, I started playing in my dad's band when I was about 13, 14. And that was like a cover band that had no drummer. So it's two guitars. He played keys and guitar, and a female vocalist. And that, so by the time I was 18, I was already playing for a few years out in public. So hold on one second. My dog's got something else.
No problem.
This is awesome. The dogs are having candid appearances in the podcast. That's Charlie back there.
Oh, look at Charlie, a beautiful dog.
Yeah, he's the best. He's a doofus.
Yeah, we used to do a podcast at my house. My Pipple would often come up and just hang out next to me during the interviews. It was always fun.
He's a good boy. But yeah, so like, you know, by the time I was like 17, 18, you know, my parents were like, you know, you gotta get a gig or you gotta go to school. That's the deal. And I tried to go to community college. I didn't last long there. And I obviously wanted to go to New York, like everybody does when they're younger, I guess. And it just wasn't the cards for me back then. It was just too expensive, and I couldn't afford to go to school there. I want to go to the new school. So the only thing I knew about Atlanta at the time was Bruce. And, you know, how I discovered Bruce Hampton was through going to a flea market where I used to buy vinyl. And the guy randomly gave me the late Bronze Days record. And then the same week at this bar I played at, I discovered the first ARU album randomly. So I was like, Atlanta wasn't really ever in my trajectory on a conscious, but subconsciously it was there. And I got called to go on a road with this band, and I just moved to Atlanta, and you know, the rest is kind of history with that. But my main intention was like to get up with Bruce one day.
Yeah. Well,
You know.
that's pretty amazing how it all worked out that way, because you ended up doing a lot of work with him. Yeah.
Yeah, I was with the old man for about almost 4 years. And, you know, I mean, I talked to him on a daily basis. And yeah, so I moved to Atlanta, and after I quit the band I was out with, I really didn't know what to do. But, you know, I was working at Starbucks and picking up gigs, and still traveling with a band, like a kind of a frat band called Holly Kind. It was real big in Alabama when I was growing up. So that was kind of paying my bills. But I was leaving to go to Alabama still, like every Wednesday or Thursday. And I was like, man, should I still be in Atlanta? But I was like, I gotta get it with Bruce somehow. And then I just started this jam session on Tuesdays at this place at 5 Spot back then, because nobody wanted the gig. And it was basically like at the time in Atlanta, in my opinion, like the cultural musical epicenter of what was happening. That was like the coolest stuff. It was a little 5 Points. It was this nice venue, and the owner, Kirk Hollingsworth, would, because he was a musician, would take chances and book really cool stuff during the week there. So, you know, he didn't care if he lost his ass. He just wanted the coolest stuff there.
Right.
And that's how, I mean, everybody met, was through that jam back then. And then, you know, eventually had to move it around a few times. The 5 Spot closed, and I went to Smith's for a brief period of time, and they didn't like it because it was way too far out. And then I was in this place, Elliott Street, for years. Then I was at 529, and that's when it was over. But it was a nice long residency, for sure.
Yeah, man. I mean, how were you guys able to kind of keep it? I guess because it was improv every night, right? So it was like, or every time you did it, so you're able to keep it fresh. But like, you know, for 15 years, that's a long time to be doing something like that. And you guys were able to, did you ever have like nights where you just like weren't feeling it and it just like kind of train wrecked, or were you kind of always playing with people that made it easy for you guys?
I mean, you know, the evolution of that night, you know, it not 20s. It was like we were playing tunes still, you know, but out of sheer frustration, I was about 22, 23. I was like, I need a break from Atlanta, because at the time it was like some of the gigs I was doing back then was with the older guys. They were just telling me basically what I wasn't doing right all the time.
Right.
I thought they were full of shit, because I was like, you know, how is this guy telling me this is wrong when he just does dinner restaurant gigs on Thursdays and I'm on the gig? Hey, thanks. Thank you so much. Yeah, text. Okay. But you know, like I told my buddy Carter Arrington, who's this amazing guitar player that is from Austin. I met him randomly in Atlanta. We became best buddies, and he was like, "Man, let's just go to New York for a week." You know, because I just, you know, discovered at the time Wayne Krantz, and that completely blew my lid because I was describing to my roommate at the time about wanting to start a guitar trio that was based around more like rhythmic and stuff and not doing the standard thing. He goes, well, there's a guy in New York that's been doing that forever. And then I got into him. So me and Carter's intention was to go to the Mecca of the universe, which was the 55 bar, and get some inspiration to take back with us down south. And that's when I saw one of the gigs I saw Wayne play was at the Iridium. And it was him and Tim LaFave, this guy Dan Wise and David Benny, and they did 2 sets of improvised music. And I remember going, man, that's what I need to be doing down there. And you know, in my typical kind of musical terroristic form, I didn't tell the club that I was going to do this. So I basically had an ensemble that was 12 people, which were 5 saxes, 3 guitars, 2 drummers, 2 basses, and we just played complete noise.
Oh my God.
Ran everybody out of there, and the manager ended up getting so mad that she quit doing that night. But the thing is, that was the first time I ever connected with Kirk, the owner, because he loved it. And Kirk was like, we need to keep doing it like this. And that's what kind of led into the improv. But back to your question about the train wrecks. I mean, if you're really honestly improvising, then in 15 years, and this is even offshooting the reality that probably 20% of it was good.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
right.
In terms of, you know, because they're really improvising, and over the years, I would have these different levels of, I would try stuff out. Like I was like, what if, you know, for a while it was a huge house band. It was like 6 or 7 people trying to do this, and eventually, when guys would come through, I'd hire them for a while, and they would take off, and I'd get new guys, and it always kind of worked out where I was at musically. And in the last 5 or 6 years of it's when, you know, I was really at that time more into getting into like dub and reggae and electronic music. And so it was me and Darren Stanley, who played with Bruce, and Spencer Pope, and we thought of improvising more of a producer's role and less about soloing. So it was like atmospheres. It wasn't hardly any solos at all.
I love that idea, man, because that's like my favorite, like, kind of improv to either watch or participate in, because it's so obvious to just like have people take turns soloing, but like, how can we actually compose on the spot and come up with like a cohesive idea and take it somewhere, you know?
Yeah. And that's you know, so that's where it kind of evolved. And, you know, on top of the music, I would do these, you know, I had these antics, very, you know, performance art, which was a borderline of comedy or just annoying to some people, but which is very in tune to the Andy Kaufman, Bruce Hampton realm for many years.
Okay.
So that was another additional way of improvising, was doing just, I mean, I can't even tell you all the stuff we used to do.
Yeah. You have like a couple examples of stuff that you can like say on air.
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing of all that I can always just kind of puts in a nutshell is one particular year, the Club Elliott Street, which is located very close to the big arena, Phillips Arena. And that night, Degenco were playing. Now, there were some cross wires because, you know, I'm very good friends with O'Teal, that the owners thought they could call it like an official after party, which you can't do. Advertise something like that.
Right.
And so we had a packed house, which isn't normal, in this basement bar. And I proceeded to do 100 balls of beer on the wall in its entirety while stacking chairs on top of my drummer, who was pinned to the ground.
Oh my God.
Until the chairs eventually fell over into the crowd. And by then there wasn't much of a crowd because we pretty much ran everybody out.
Yeah.
So that that was kind of the intention of performance art was really just to prove, Colonel Bruce's I could talk about him for 10 hours straight, stories or whatever, but his quote about taking what you do seriously and not yourself is basically, I'm gonna get it tattooed soon. It's like my motto for everything, because in reality, it's like nobody wants to be around people that take themselves so seriously what they do. To me, it's a very big sign of insecurity where you have to kind of live through being something else,
Right.
especially as musicians. And there's nothing worse than meeting somebody that thinks their shit doesn't stink for playing music, which in a certain sense is just touching something with your hands.
Literally is that. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like it's just making something vibrate, really, and then be able to control that to an extent. But yeah, it's wild.
Or singing, and then if you think about it, it's like we're not EMTs, we're not police officers, we're not school teachers. It's just the reality of the rational human mind of what we do is very unimportant. But then the important part is why art's most important, it inspires goodwill.
Exactly.
So it's a dichotomy of reality, because we are essentially useless and then the most important people on the planet somehow.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people saw that during the pandemic and the lockdowns and stuff too, when especially people that are active in the music community, whether you're a musician or you're like a supporter, I think people were missing that interaction. Because, at the end of the day, for those police officers, those EMTs, those firefighters, the school teachers, when they go out to alleviate the stress of their life and their work, a lot of the times we're the soundtrack to that alleviation, which perpetuates, a healthy state of mind and all that stuff. So the idea, what we do is important, but it's also kind of comical when you think about what the act of what we're doing actually is,
Exactly. And that's just Bruce's whole point, I think, in a nutshell, is that.
Yeah.
Because especially when I started working more with all these, like John McLaughlin, and, when people didn't know me, if someone knew me, they knew what they're getting themselves into. But on paper, it's like, oh, I'm going to go see this, world-class bass player, steady gig. I can't wait to go see it. And then it would be me, smoking cigarettes at the side and throwing stuff, and screaming. And because it's all tied into that, because it's improvising.
Right. Now I'm really curious about this, because I love this concept of tying in performance art and the improv and just kind of the absurdity of all of it. But then also that dynamic or that dichotomy that you're kind of portraying in your performance, there's also that in your day-to-day, right? Because then you're actually getting hired to do studio work for pop artists and stuff like that, where it's very meticulous and there is no fucking off or improv. This is what has to be done. So how do you kind of, balance those two worlds, especially if you make it part of your brand,
Well, that's the thing, is like, I don't, sideman work is work. It's I've known people for years that didn't know I did, played on, number one hip hop records and stuff, because that's not my thing. That is a means to provide food on the table.
Right.
So that's how I separate it, is that those gigs provide me to do shit with like the Wed-Night Titans, where I can wear spandex and play this future music with like my favorite drummer ever. So it's like, but unless you have financial stability through somebody or family or something like that, it's like you have to So when people ask me a question about their careers, if they're frustrated, because I teach a lot now, and most of my students are, in fact, all of them at this point are either professionals or amateur professionals. And some guys have day gigs but they play what they want. I'm like, there's no difference in that.
Right.
I mean, I think it's also sort of a disservice sometimes when you get caught up in the loop of doing shit you don't ever want to do, and it comes out in your friends, family, and your own music. So I just have two separate brains because I do love, like, the session world is I passionately love that aspect as much as I like, wearing no shirt and smashing beer bottles on my head or something. You know what I mean? It's the same level of I like doing it because it's a different side of my brain.
Right.
It's just switching. It's like a switch, But you also have to keep it real. And even for session work, I take chances, and I've gotten arguments with producers, and there's also a level of being kind of keeping a dangerous profile, even in certain worlds. Just I don't want to be a part of every orbit.
It's an interesting way to describe it. I really like that a lot. I think the more experience that you get doing those different things, you kind of learn what works for you, what doesn't. And it's cool because I can really appreciate the idea of, the performance side of it and the improv and like the passion project, but then also being as into the structure and the execution of of what seems like perfection in the recording and pop world, and to understand and using your judgment as to when and where it's appropriate, and to have the same passion for like that structure, I think is very cool, and also just indicative of your passion for music as a whole, right? Because a lot of people get so caught up, I think, in the jam and the improv thing, where it becomes almost like the structure is a joke, or it's just kind of absurd. But to like have the idea of what you're talking about, I think it's admirable, and it's very cool to hear that that's how you think about it,
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to it's amazing that even in certain circles, when you organize human beings together, a hierarchy is going to be set. And one of the craziest things about that is that a lot of people can't just, even though they have been their whole lives felt that they've been made fun of or whatever as a musician, and they get drawn to, let's say, like the really out free jazz noise world, and the amount of pretentious people in that scene is just like a pop world.
Yeah, I mean, totally.
I'm like, what? Okay, so you're eating oatmeal and playing a frying pan as your set.
Yeah.
But I'm still getting vibed here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, bro.
It's what I mean, and I'm not gonna name names in New York, but I'm just always trying to find balanced people, because that's really what I like. Is obviously a lot of people I listen to are not necessarily I agree on certain things about music, but majority of them I think are, and just I can appreciate the guy with the frying pan and oatmeal as much as I can Stravinsky in a way, because it kind of ties back to the authenticism of what they're doing and the intention. That's all I really look for.
Exactly, the intention, I think, is the authenticity and intention is, I think, the most important thing. Because if you're doing it for the right reasons and you're doing it, ultimately that's what it is. If you're doing it for the right reasons, that's the intention and that's the authenticity. And that definitely shines in the playing. And oftentimes when bands or musicians, I think, fall short is when you're abandoning the intention and the authenticity for fitting a mold that is not what you're trying to be, or not really who you are, And I've had this happen in my own personal, endeavors as an artist, because, you do, like, especially when you're younger, you get kind of distracted by the glory of this or that. And you're like, well, I want to do this, and I think I want to do that. And you're abandoned. You don't really know who you are yet, Did you ever go through that process, do you think?
Oh, I mean, of course. I mean, it's a part of the developmental phase of trying to find the sound that's in your head.
Right.
Because, the problem is that, it's the same thing as a vice. Vice is one, people who give advice are full of shit.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing. It's like when people ask me for advice, I'm like, I don't give advice, because it's like, this is what I do. and I don't want to have any kind of skew something I don't know anything about. You know, and in reality, the only person you're ever going to know 100% about is yourself. It doesn't matter who that is, and that's what you have to. That's my mindset for musicians. And you have to be honest with yourself that the imposter syndrome and going through the phases is part of it, and it comes and goes. And you know, of course, when I was, you know, I made some really bad decisions when I was in my, you know, post Bruce years about thinking about like, well, I want to be kind of like this, you know, just for gun hire guy forever. And, you know, there's a few bands I quit playing in and that were original projects because I was wanting to do this and whatever. And looking back, it's like, I'm such the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like, I'm more into attracting myself with like projects and like bands and, whatever it may be. And there's certain, you know, I mean, when you make a conscious decision to be honest and for what you really want to do, there's a lot of sacrifices. And I've definitely turned down gigs that some people would be extremely excited about based on the fact that I'd rather not do that because of just my mental capacity of handling not being happy.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
to me, it's work. You know, if I don't have any writing and I don't have, you know, if I'm just a sideman, then you're hiring me for a service to play bass. And that's the extent I will go, you know?
Right. Well, I feel like also there's got to be like a certain level of it where even if there's not writing or something, there's got to be like an attachment to the music itself, right? So
Number one thing.
Exactly. Because if you're not getting any of the credit on the writing side or whatever, and it's just work, you have to at least enjoy the work that's being had.
Exactly. And for me, there's a far in between gigs that'll do that. And there's a few that I would definitely, you know, jump on, you know, if I had a way. And then there's also a few gigs that are the opposite, which I really love the music, which is totally out of my fucking, you wouldn't believe that I'd probably say that, you know?
Like what do you think? Like some stuff that might surprise people?
I mean, you know, like Wow Love It would be an insanely sick, you know, touring gig because it's that large band concept is great.
Yeah,
you know?
He's really not talked about enough as a songwriter, man. He's amazing.
Great, amazing songs, great look, great organization. You know, that's kind of a, you know, I guess a kind of opposite spectrum. You know, I think when I did that run last year with Government Mule, you know, that's another band that I would totally jump on to play with. You know, because the music's amazing, the crew's amazing, it's a legacy that I support, and it's in my wheelhouse. I can still be myself.
Right, totally.
I think it, you know, even like Dwight Yoakam would be fun.
Oh hell yeah,
that'd be a sick gig.
Hell yeah.
Yebba.
Fuck yeah.
He's got a diverse. So you know, that would be stuff that would be musically fulfilling and spiritually fulfilling, also being for hire. You know, but there's, you know, 90% of stuff I could name I would, you know, be a really hard decision of why we do it.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that, man. Again, that just comes with more, like the more scenarios you put yourself in, and the more you've said yes to over the years, at some point you start learning how to say no, even if the opportunity seems like it's, you know, a good one. It's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, a paycheck or a status thing is not going to make me happy as much as, you know, as you know, I'm sure musicians struggle for a very long time before there's any kind of financial payoff, if there ever is. And it's easy to get distracted by, you know, getting that pop gig and being like, man, this is good money, but am I going to be happy really at the end of the day? You know,
how long is it going to last?
Yeah, that too, right? That could be like one tour that you're on and then you're done, if even a whole one.
Or you're, you know, it's Yeah, and my it's such a calling it a business is hilarious, but it's the music business is one of the craziest it's not any other business.
Yeah.
There's literally, and this is more Bruce Hampton stuff, is there is absolutely no guarantee of anything ever. You're basically just at the fucking blackjack table or the roulette table your whole life if you do it. And it's not for everybody, and that's why you have to really want it to do it. And that's what the pandemic showed a lot of people, including myself, because it was like I ate shit and did my time of just, the Chitlin circuit and van tours. And then and until I was about 31 years old is when I, went on my first international tour and then started working with Krantz, and I opened up so many doors, and it was like, wow, now I've got I've got these great projects with Forq and the Titans and my own, Titans is my own stuff with Zach and Forq. And I was doing Jimmy and all these great gigs, and I was on the road a bunch making a good living. And then pandemic happens, and when things came back up, it's, none of that was really around.
Right.
And so you have to adapt. It's like, I'm not gonna be like, oh my God, I things have changed. It's like you have to adapt and figure out other means of supporting yourself, and it's not easy for anybody.
Totally, man. I'm curious what your first, that first international tour was. Who'd you go out with, and how'd you catch that break?
I went out with a band called Lark and Poe.
Oh, no shit.
Yep, years ago. And at the time, she had the rhythm section for a while, and she ended up, I say she like they're one person, but they ended up wanting a new band, and they had auditions in Atlanta. And again, I'm not saying I definitely put time into getting the gig, but I wasn't like hell bent on saying if I lose this opportunity, I'm going to be crushed. So,
right.
I just kind of went in there just looking as a job, and I got the gig with Darren, and we did a month out with them. And that, but the thing is, when you do one tour international, it's weird. Like literally, that means you're going back forever. All it takes is one way getting in. And my buddy Emil Wursler told me that, who, Emil I grew up with is one of the best guitar players ever. And he was really heavily involved in the extreme metal scene and played with just toured the world when he was like in his early 20s, So I remember him telling me that, and literally I get back from Europe, I get called for a Japanese run. And then, so it's just weird, and, how that all kind of worked itself out. But, yeah, it just takes, having a reputation that doesn't have nuclear blast in it. It's okay if it's like, well, he's kind of, he can be a little intense or whatever it may be. But as long as it's not like, well, he gets blackout drunk and pisses on himself on stage, or we don't know if he's going to show up, or he's an asshole. As long as you can maintain a legit reputation of being a professional, kind guy, I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, totally. And what I'm curious, because this is a story that's it's pretty common within the industry, is that you catch a break, right, and then you go on tour, international tour, and then obviously the preparation helps and all that, but people then find themselves existing in this ecosystem of these international touring bands, like what happened with you. And then all of a sudden you're bouncing around, and before you know it, a few years goes by, and you're like, man, I really haven't been home or had to play like a restaurant gig in however long. What do you think that is? Is it just showing up and doing the job and getting the exposure? Or is there something else that kind of when you break into that ecosystem, you just don't really, unless you really fuck up, there's really no going back, right? Or if the world shuts down, obviously.
I mean, there's also, it's like a level of, and I tell people this all the time, is like, as just the nature of being called for hire, being a sideman, you have to say yes to everything. And pay should not be a factor. It should not. And that's the hardest part for a lot of people to kind of grasp is, because, I grew up in a small town in Alabama with your typical lower middle class family. I mean, they're musicians and, the way I sung growing up is that we didn't have a whole lot of money, but for Christmas I would get a Sega Genesis.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Or whatever it was back then. But it wasn't like we didn't have, we lived in the typical lower class, middle class neighborhood. So, taking chances in that situation where you don't have a big net is horrifically daunting sometimes, because you're like, well, if I turn down this corporate gig on Friday and go play this gig, I'm going to lose $200, or at least me, I only have $100 instead of $3 or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, every gig I've ever gotten, pretty much every gig that I've wanted to do, like from whoever, from Krantz to Bruce, all came from playing gigs that you wouldn't think. Like Bruce first saw me play at a Bojanic gig in Atlanta, this Indian restaurant on a Wednesday I used to do for $50.
Wow.
And then the first time Jimmy heard me was at my jam session, which at the time paid nothing. So I think there has to, again, be a balance. It's, if you know that certain people are hanging places that you want to work with, and the gig pays $25, in the long term, it's more worth it than, because when I first started playing with Krantz, I was flying up to New York on my own dime to play with them. Now, mind you, like usually the gig paid $300 to $500, and at the time flights weren't what they are now. So I would essentially break even.
Right.
55-bar gigs. Now, just playing that gig in New York alone meant that it's like, oh shit, you're doing the Krantz gig. Now you're doing it on a steady basis. We got to come check this guy out.
Right.
So again, in terms of long-term financial gain from taking chances on stuff like that, it's surpassed any amount of money I make playing some standard corporate gig every year.
Of course. There's a lot of musicians that you talk to out there that are like, doing the wedding circuit, the corporate circuit, and they're doing okay, but like they hate, it's almost like they hate playing music at this point. Like you talk to them and they're like, it's literally only dollar signs in their head. There's nothing else going on when it comes to their instrument. I feel like a lot of that is because of always chasing the dollar. It's like, well, I'll do this for a little while, and then eventually a creative project will come along. But unless you really make the effort, a creative project doesn't really come along. That's literally the antithesis of how a creative project works. It's like you have to chase it. You have to like put the effort in to create it, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember years ago people laughing, and then I would say, I'm gonna play with Krantz one day. So you gotta move to New York. I mean, it's, again, there's a lot of influences and a lot of self willpower of affirmation and sticking true to your guns, not listening to other people.
Right.
It's a big thing. Is being very careful where your information comes from, who's telling you.
Totally.
Because it's like, if somebody utmost respected told me to do something, I'd listen. But somebody's being negative again, who's frustrated with their own career, what advice can they give anybody?
Misery loves company, man. That's why it's important to like, and I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's cliche because it's real. People that are not happy want to bring other people with them on that journey because it's to validate their disgruntled state of mind. And you're never going to really meet somebody more disgruntled than a musician that's been doing it for 20 plus years that just hasn't caught their break, and chances are it's because of their mindset, you know.
Sure, or it's like, you know, I mean, again, there's all sorts of circumstances, and that's why you have to kind of roll the punches about life, because that determines more than your career.
Right.
You can't get bitter about things that are happening in your life that, you know, cause you to have setbacks in your career, because it only gets more crazy when you get more into it.
Right. That's such a good point. Yeah.
It doesn't get easier. That's what a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
It gets way harder, you know, because it was, you know, because at the time when I was working all these, you know, very insane progressive instrumental groups in New York that were mostly electric fusion based, you know, it'd be like, okay, I'm off tour with Forq. Now I'm going on tour with Donny McCaslin, and these songs are extremely hard too. So how do you balance that out? Well, it means I don't go out on the road. A lot of times back then, I'd have to sit in my hotel room after a gig and start learning material and pick your battles. You know, I mean, it's just what it is, and it doesn't get easier. That's the misconception. If you think like, oh man, I'm doing this. Well, what happens when the next thing calls while you're doing that? You know, you know, it's like, and the pressure of playing in certain communities of musician world is, it, you know, I mean, I really have got to the point of not giving a shit about that now. When I first started doing it, it was like, you look out in the crowd and it's like, man, how many of these guys are judging me right now?
Oh, yeah.
One of them. But now I could just give two shits about that at all. It's like, you're just going to take what I give you, and if you don't like it, you can fuck off.
Yeah.
And if you like it, you can fuck off. Everybody
Yeah, well, that's also like a thing where, you know, it's important to, you know, you've done the work as an artist and a musician, right? You've practiced, you have like all this experience now. You've done all different kinds of work. Like on some level, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like there is a level of validation that you reach that has come from other people after years of doing it, where now you can be like, yeah, well, I know that I'm capable. I know that what I'm doing up here is valid. So if you don't like it, I really don't care, because I've been doing this for however long now, and other people have proven that they enjoy it. So I'm not fucking crazy, right? I mean,
yeah, I had that mentality even in high school.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't know why I did, but I think the biggest adjustment, like I said, was, you know, feeling pressure from working with people that don't feel that way.
Right.
Sorry, people, because I get it. Like, people have a natural tendency to want to micromanage in general, and just the nature of my instrument already, it opens up many doors of argument from disagreeing what should happen, because everybody has their own kind of mindset of what or who their favorite guy playing bass is, and that leaks into what they hear bass. So, you know, I just think, you know, about you're saying about the validation thing that is a great point, because when you start doing more and more stuff, then you are essentially like that weight is lifted a little bit.
Exactly.
Not wondering what that is.
Exactly. I'm also curious because as a bass player, right, there's a lot of guys out there. You're kind of like the bridge of the rhythm and the melody, right? Like you're the glue that's holding that all together. And how much, you know, somebody early on that I respected gave me this great advice. Like, it's important to listen to a song and just, you know, obviously you take everything in, but then go back and listen to it and just pick out one instrument and just focus on that one thing, on what it's doing. I'm curious, as a bass player, how much are you paying attention when you're listening or playing to other instruments and their role within the music, and how much influence are you drawing from that to, you know, as a factor in whatever it is that you're playing or even just listening to?
I mean, listening and playing are two different things to me, but when I play music, I don't listen to myself.
Right.
Because, I mean, in my opinion, it's like the instrument of bass is the equivalent of saying you're the offense or defensive line of in the NFL. You know, it's your bait to me. It's like I'm trying to protect Tom Brady here.
Gotcha. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I like that.
I mean, of course, you know, I relate to a lot of things to sports. I grew up playing some sports, and I mean, bass is you have to be kind of a psychic in a way, because you're kind of having to control, you know, okay, the drummer's rushing, so I need to lay back. I'm rushing compared to the drummer, and he's laying back because they were good. So it's these constant bounces you have to kind of subconsciously kind of get on the same page with, because you don't really want to think that much as a bass player, in my opinion, because it's such a in the moment situation, you know. And that, you know, I mean, I don't remember at this point from, you know, kind of practicing listening while playing. I don't really remember a lot of stuff I play on a gig because I'm so kind of infatuated with what's happening around me.
Right.
You know, occasionally I remember, and it's like, oh, that was really a shitty idea.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I don't remember a lot of the positive stuff, unfortunately.
I mean, what musician does, really, you know?
Yeah, I would love to have their brain for just an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Like last night, it's like, you know, when I get put in situations where it's, all right, packed house, you're about to play with people you've never played with, you're going to improvise and make music. You have to just kind of think about, like, well, at least the first 10 minutes are going to be just some ass sniffing.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's get that over with, and then we're going to get in some shit. But it's definitely, that's the most challenging thing to me, is just, all right, never played together, just met an hour ago. Okay, let's go play music and make it all up. That's you know, it's kind of me where it kind of separates the adults from the kids, is be able to handle that.
Totally. Do you ever have like amateurs come in to like your jam sessions, and like people that maybe won't have been playing a couple years, if that, and like, you know, how did you ever, obviously you guys are at such a level, how did you mitigate that situation?
Well, I would put them up there with guys that, you know, I had a take where, okay, this kid's coming up, I'm going to put him up with the best guys I can, and just to kind of in one ways see how both parties react, you know, because if you're at a jam session and let's say you tour with a huge act and you're this professional and you have accolades and you decide to go out and jam, and you get mad about playing with somebody who thinks not at your level, then you miss the point of it completely, because you're not on a gig. It's you're literally sharing experiences, you know. Right. And so people do that. I would just, you know, how extreme it was, I would just basically not tell them to come back, and I didn't care who it was.
So if they were like vibing people out, you tell them not to come back, or you would tell Absolutely. The people that couldn't hang. Okay, got you. That's the
thing, is like that's the time for people who, you know, quote unquote can't hang to kind of get their confidence and learn some stuff from guys in a proper way. So I mean, the idea of like, you know, vibing and beating somebody in submission does not work.
Right.
I think there's a lot of stories about the past that were myths because they don't give you the full story. Because, you know, yeah, there's a level, you know, I've definitely worked with some, you know, some of the first older guys I worked with were, you know, brutal in a sense if I did something wrong, but they'd always explain to me afterwards why.
Right.
You know, but it's also, I'm on their gig. But at a jam session, what is the point of this?
Yeah, I guess that's true, man.
This means you're an asshole.
I really appreciate that perspective, and it's not one that I've really considered, because you do, when you're first starting out, you do have to have a place to like work your shit out. You know, it's like you can't just be expected to walk into a situation and know what to do if you haven't had any real experience, And where else are you supposed to get that experience other than a jam session, you know?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, especially in the quote unquote jazz sessions, you know, which are notorious for this bad behavior or those for whatever reason in particular. And I think any genre based session is going to have that happen already.
Right. Yeah, because there's kind of like this commitment to the authenticity of the genre type thing.
Which, I mean, it's just hilarious. You're at a jam session, you know, like, what is the point?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely understand that. I think what I can see in some scenarios is people wanting to uphold a standard of an experience for the audience. Because if you got like managers or club owners or promoters down your ass about people showing up or buying tickets or just hanging out regardless, because the music can be kind of a clusterfuck. But then it's like, well, then don't have a jam night, because that's kind of the whole point, is that we're figuring shit out here, you know?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, that's another disconnect of the business, is the owners of the clubs. And I remember years of my session where we'd have, you know, a bad week or something, and I'd be like, well, how much you make at the bar? I was like, sure, to make more than that if I wasn't here on a Tuesday. Yeah, right.
Right.
I mean, like, it's just common sense. Okay, you made $2,000 at the bar on a Tuesday. How much would you make it if there was nothing happening here? Less than half of that, probably.
Right. Especially if you're bringing in like jammers and stuff like that, people that wouldn't have been there otherwise, and all that, you know.
Yeah, so it just ties into, like, you know, again, like, all right, I'm starting my blues jam, and somebody shows up and they're playing way too much over everybody. And how I would approach that I would just directly talk to them. You know, there's plenty of times running that session where, you know, I mean, people would just not know what to do, and it's your job as the host or the leader to express to them in a way that hopefully they'll listen to you. You know, that's not saying I didn't send people. I mean, there's been plenty of people over the years that I was just like, you can't come back here.
Really?
It's like, no. And it wasn't necessarily because of their playing, but because of their attitude and their disregard of listening when people suggested things that were, you know, I mean, if you're annoying 5 people every time you come out every week, then it's not them.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not, and as you could probably tell by now, I am not some guy that's going to be extremely hostile towards somebody that's trying to learn. So
no, it seems quite the opposite. Actually, that's something that I've really admired about this conversation, because it's kind of, you know, opened up my eyes a little bit in that regard. Not that like I'm ever hostile to people, but there's definitely sometimes I've run jam sessions where you are getting pressure from promoters and whoever, and you're like, well, I've got to maintain a status here, so we want this to be to come off as close to professional as possible. It's a jam, so obviously there's gonna be some moments, but you know, we don't want like amateur hour here. We want consistently good musicians to show up. So then you do kind of put off this thing, but I think that I like what you're saying, because it really encourages the community aspect of it. Like, if you want people to show up and you want people to get encouraged and excited about your scene, you need to give them a place to go, judgment free, to work their shit out. And hopefully, if you're a good leader, then you can inspire people to listen and to get better, rather than vibe them out and be like, don't come back here type shit, because that doesn't really help anybody.
No, and it's also, I mean, there's, you know, this is, of course, because it goes back to the whole bullshit status thing where, you know, I remember when the 5 spot was just beginning, and some of these older guys they used to call it the amateur spot, you know. And then you fast forward a few years, because, you know, people talk, and every community, it's like, if people talk shit, then you're going to hear about it. And you know, the irony is, so many people saying that, one in particular person, you know, you fast forward a few years ago, now they're just, you know, playing my record and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I thought I was the amateur,
Right.
So you gotta be careful of your perception about young players, and I have to catch myself doing that too. Is that people change and get better, So if your first impression of a guy that's 22 that is not where you think he should be, you can't really just hold on to that because 8 years from now you're gonna be eating his lunch.
Yeah, totally. Definitely experience that for sure.
So it's good to, not to hold on to like these first impressions of guys when they're younger, or anybody in general, because man, you never know. People get better off, you never know.
Totally, man. Totally. We got to wrap up here in a minute, but we have a segment that we do at the end called Unpopular Opinions. And we just kind of go around real quick and
do that for now.
Yeah, I know, right? You seem like somebody's got a lot of opinions. So I'm excited to hear what you guys say. We each go around and just say one opinion and briefly discuss it and see what we think. Chris has been pretty silent this episode, so why don't we give you the first round here, Chris? You got something?
Why, thank you.
There's somebody else here?
Hey, man, it's Chris.
Yeah, right.
The Zoom doesn't go on me. I'm on the podcast, but I just sit back here pushing buttons.
That's sick.
Yeah, man. It's the best gig ever. I don't have to say shit.
But you do.
Okay.
Good as the law.
Okay. All right. Unpopular opinion that I think will resonate here. Music school is doing more harm than good these days. As someone who just got out of it and seeing a bunch of my friends that are still in it after being on the gigging scene for a little bit, it is just, you're almost better off just kind of going through YouTube Academy or, linking up with friends. But the academia side of it I see it just kind of imprinting a certain kind of mindset on players, and it definitely encouraged me to go to a certain direction that I had to kind of, get some real world experience in and just kind of get other perspectives in terms of like a career and what I wanted to be doing and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Music school, it's a dangerous place. Are
you reading my mind right now? I literally have been having this. I had the same conversation earlier, and I'll voice my. I will agree with you 1,000% on that.
Heck yeah.
That you are 1,000% correct, and I think that we're finally coming to an age where the majority of musical institutions at this point are a business, and you having $100,000 in debt getting out of school to be a musician. Okay, like just let that sink in.
Yeah.
That's a lot of dinner jazz gigs to pay that off, aka for 90 years you played one every night, so
yeah.
So I 100% agree with you there, and I do think musical education is it needs to go back to what it was at one time, which is a mentorship, and I've been, that's the main reason why I teach is to counteract what I think is bullshit, and it's not very popular to tell people, and thousands of people that have invested a lot of money in it, but I think it's more valid to find somebody that you have accessibility to, or even nowadays because of the internet, you can help any fucking musician in the world say, I want to learn from you.
Yeah,
and it's going to cost you probably $100-$200 an hour instead of $100,000. Anyway, yeah. I agree with you there.
Yeah, man. So I went and auditioned for this jazz school, and the best thing that happened was that I didn't get in. And they just started the tech program. So I studied sound engineering, production, all this shit, but they would classically train you to a lesser extent than like the jazz or classical kids. So I ended up getting lessons with this cat, James Hogan, that was just an unreal player and just had a similar mentality of like, it wasn't like, hey, you have to shed Donna Lee or shed Autumn Leaves. It's like, bring in what you want to bring in. I'll show you cats that probably inspired him. It just showed me so many different branches of the tree. And it was like, and we talked about how that wasn't like what other students right next to me were getting. It was really baffling. And so like I talked to a lot of my music buddies, and everyone who kind of comes out the other side that's like really working and stuck with it, they all say the same thing. It's something else.
You know, I teach at New School every now and then up in New York, and you know, I mean, I tell them students the same thing.
They must have loved you over there.
They don't. But they have to accept a request from a student. That's the beautiful thing about it. Is if they put a request in, they have to validate that. They can't probably legally talk them out of it. So,
wow, it's kind of cool.
Thank God for that system, right? So.
Yeah, I agree definitely that there's a lot of musicians that get caught up in that, and they're having to skip out on gigs, or they're having to like miss opportunities because they have a workload from them on like in school. Not to mention there's a lot of the business side that's overlooked, I think, or just like the preparation of what it means to be on a gig. It's like they can come in, run, scales, and they got all the chops in the world. They have no real understanding of application yet, which I think only comes from the experience of being on a gig and working with other people. There is a mentorship aspect of it, and the pressure of knowing that there's a grade at the end of it that says whether or not you pass or fail, that makes you spend those 8 hours a day in the practice room. But I think that if you can find that outside of music school without paying all that money, like you're saying, the private lessons and stuff can offer the same thing. But even then, there's still a level of like, I don't know. I think overall, if there's another option, it definitely makes more sense.
I'll put it this way. So this is what happened to me today. I had a new student, never met. His first time coming in right before the podcast. Well, I was late. It's his fault.
Name names.
He, I basically, there's something happening in my radar that I can't talk about that that's coming up. So I have to cancel a bunch of work next few months. So guy comes in, great player, great dude. And what do? I'm going to recommend you for this gig. That's how, you know what I mean? It's like, I think that the only good thing about school is you meet other people that can connect the dots.
Exactly.
But you can do that the same way if you go out every night. And I think if you guys can remember being 21, you're going out every night anyway.
Right.
So it's like, especially a city like New York, I mean, it's just the amount of stuff happening is just unbelievable. And there's a crew for everybody. And so I wholeheartedly agree with that opinion.
Do that.
Is this, okay? We are entering the age now that younger musicians think smooth jazz is cool because it's been marketed a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think we all three know who I'm referring to, probably.
Yeah.
Right? Without saying his name, because I don't want to say his name because it might be like that movie, the Candyman might show up somehow.
Yeah.
But I am deeply disturbed that a lot of the younger musicians now are basically listening to smooth music when it's being advertised as not such, and that's very disturbing to me. Like you shouldn't be. Could you imagine when we were younger and you're like, well, who's your favorite man? Who are you listening to? You're like, yeah, I'm really big on like this Kenny G record.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I'm really big on the Rippingtons record, which again is not taking away from them as musicians, but they have decided to go down a route of criticism based on more, because it's cheese dick shit, So.
Yeah, cheese dick shit. Yeah.
And now we've entered an age where it's infiltrated, where that's the hip stuff.
Right.
It's not as, it greatly disturbs me, some of the things that I see on my Instagram feed of what is essentially edgy now, which is the complete opposite. There's no teeth at all.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. To me, it seems like a watered down version of it seems like a failed attempt at something, right? And it's like, well, this is obtainable. This is easy, and it sounds a certain way. So let's do this rather than just like really putting the work and going for it and taking a risk,
Yeah, or just not being exposed. I mean, it's again like it's the one particular artist I'm talking about. His music definitely reflects his personality. So I think he is truly being honest, but it doesn't mean I have to fucking like it or So, but it just so happens that's the hot ticket now, one of them.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, man, for sure.
I would say his name, but I can't say it. I'm gonna just leave it at that. I can't say his name.
No, that's probably a smart call.
Yeah, the problem is I feel like it should be obvious, but I've got like 3 or 4 guesses. I won't guess. I won't put you in that position, but I think it's equally alarming that I don't know exactly who it is. I don't know exactly who it is by this.
Yeah. I think anybody listening to this is gonna know exactly who I'm talking to if they know me for more than 10 minutes. So.
Yeah, that's a good unpopular opinion. I would tend to agree with you for sure. 100%. All right, my unpopular opinion this week, I've been sitting on this one for a minute, but I gotta say it. Rappers who claim to be the greatest are rarely the greatest. In fact, they're never the greatest. And this is a trend that's been happening, I think, since the beginning of hip hop. However, there's a difference between being in like a rap battle and proclaiming something versus literally marketing yourself as such. And I think the first time I experienced this was when I was in high school, and Lil Wayne came out with this persona, and like the greatest rapper alive song came out and all this, and it was like, okay, but you're not the greatest rapper alive, right? Because Lil Wayne, for all of his influence in the pop world and his ushering in of what I would consider today to be called mumble rap, I think that Lil Wayne was the purveyor of that entire genre. I think when you have rappers like, Mos Def and Talib Kweli and people within that sphere that exist and are still putting music out, you can't call yourself the greatest rapper alive, especially if you're operating in the pop world just as a skill set. You know what I mean?
I've had, it's funny. I've had this talk about other genres as well, and I think it's I think the point of that is that it doesn't even matter,
right?
So that's the really kind of crazy thing is like you take a guy that claims on the greatest of anything, it kind of goes the sports route, right?
Right.
There's a guy that I know very well, work with him. He's an incredible musician. Explained to me why that's a good mindset to have, because it doesn't matter.
I see. So it's kind of like a reverse thing where it's like, okay, you can say it, but it doesn't actually mean anything. Yeah.
Because honestly, it's like it's like if you think about, I bet an unpopular opinion would be the guys we think are the greatest. The majority of people, like, who they probably go, who is that? Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah.
He's the greatest. I've never even. Who's that?
Yeah,
I like this guy. It's like, what?
Totally. Yeah, it's just it's.
Or who would you think? Who do you think is the greatest rapper of all time is?
I think that you're correct in saying that it's kind of like it doesn't really matter, and I don't know that there is a greatest of all time, but I think that there are people that are thinking in ways and that are communicating those ideas in ways that are far more advanced than other people, and and then there's an entire culture that buys into the rhetoric, right? And the way that influences culture is dangerous, I think. when there's
Right.
people that have a real message, they're trying to say a real thing, and they really put the time and work into their craft, and that's not being paid attention to in the same way. You know what I mean?
I mean, absolutely. I agree with you there. I guess you're right. It is a kind of a dangerous road to take when it leaks into everything, you know?
Yeah, because and circling kind of to round out the whole conversation, I think circling back to the beginning, when we talk about music and artists and what we do not being super, like, it's kind of like nonsense at the end of the day, but that duality of us being like what we do being nonsense versus it also being the most important thing is because like music and art in general is a representation of where culture is at just in general. And I think that when we start, when we're kind of putting on a pedestal, music, especially, you know, hip hop hits me in a weird kind of way because I have such an affinity for the genre, but where I see it existing now on the pop level, it's an economy of words, and it's like, and to now have some of the most popular rappers on the planet that are popular for their lack of putting together a cohesive sentence, you know what I mean? It seems counterintuitive, and I think ultimately, you know, is a bad representation of where we could be as a culture, you know?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite guys is Big Crit.
Oh, yeah.
He's probably my favorite right now.
Amazing. I love Big Crit.
He's definitely conscious, and he produces everything, and I love him. But I feel you there. I mean, it's especially in that genre. I mean, it's you know, if you look at the history of rappers, they list, you know, guys like Ric Flair as their biggest. You know, there's a reason for that. You know.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally. Anyways, I gotta head off to a gig, and I don't want to keep you any longer either. Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure hanging out and talking to you, man. It's been really great getting to pick your brain. I love the way you think about a lot of things. It's very cool.
Man, well, thanks for keeping me on it, because all this stuff just keeps popping up. So I appreciate you guys just not being like, all right, well, fuck you. This is not gonna happen.
Of course, man. Of course, it's
great.
Yeah, man. I'm glad we were able to make this happen, and good luck with everything in New York. And I'm sure we'll see each other down the line.
Yeah, I hope so. Hopefully be down there sooner than later. You know, it's a good time to be down there.
Yeah, man.
So.
Definitely. All right, man. Well, we'll talk soon. Have a good one.
Awesome, man. See y'all soon.
Peace.